I really feel that I have a life right now that I'm living that has braided together all of the things that the Race Praxis Initiative is about: love, spiritual transformation, and racial justice.
Welcome to our conversation on racial justice and sacred love, a podcast project by the Fetzer Institute. In this series, we bring together spiritual leaders to share their wisdom, experiences, and stories at the intersection of love, racial justice, and spiritual transformation. Through these conversations, we explore the common threads of faith and spirituality and the pursuit of shared flourishing. Together, we build a spiritual foundation for a loving world. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here with Angela O, who is the co-creator of The Gift of Compassion at Commonweal.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I wanted to just start off by having you talk about what you define as sacred, or what does sacred mean to you?
Oh, everything is sacred. Moments are sacred. People sacred. Relationships are sacred. The natural world, everything about it, everything in it, everything that holds it up. I mean, the sacred is everywhere. And I used to not think that.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain things that were sacred, objects. Then you realize, oh, those are just objects. They're not it, right? I had a teacher who once said, don't forget to eat the food while you're looking at the menu. Most people just look at the menu and they forget to eat the food, you know? So I really feel that I have a life right now that I'm living that has braided together all of the things that the Race Praxis Initiative is about: love, spiritual transformation, and racial justice. The last thing being the thing that we have to deal with in space, right? The others are time. But the racial justice piece is very material. And so to bring in love and spiritual transformation in connection with racial justice is actually a sacred process in itself.
Yeah, thank you for just getting right into the heart of the matter, because I do think that's where all of your work, both the life work and spiritual work, and then also the professional, I guess, is how you would put it,
Sure.
meet in that way. And so can you talk about how you found yourself in that space?
Oh, of course. You know, my body is packaged as an Asian American, what we call Asian American, which of course is a construct here in this country because we need to figure out how to categorize people, right? The easiest thing to do is to look at physical features, I guess, but it's also the most shallow way of knowing a person, a human being. But that's the package I'm in, and I think that was meant to be. I'm a female body. I'm a second generation ethnic Korean by lineage. My parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. So this is a aspect of my being, right, that is material. And it has a real impact on what I get to experience in the world. It inaccurately predicts what I'm about when I meet people. So how did I come into the practice that I'm in now, where everything has braided together? As far as I'm concerned, the braid is very, very clear, very present. So as a younger person, I should say that both of my grandparents on my mother's side and father's side were ministers. My grandfather on my dad's side trained here in divinity, but was the product of missionary work on the Korean Peninsula. My family on that side is from the north. My mother's side, my grandfather was also a minister, He followed the Catholic tradition, also a product of missionary work, came to the United States in order to just preach. My grandmother was much younger than my grandfather. In fact, they were one of those matched marriages. My grandmother on my mother's side pretty much raised me till I was 5. She came here because I was born. So that tells you something about kind of my base.
Yeah.
But I was not a religious person really growing up. We went to Sunday school and we did all that stuff, but it really was more social. The fellowship was about connecting with the rest of the immigrant Korean community, helping each other, bringing over some customs and practices that would help families stabilize here. But when I went to school at UCLA, and I was born and raised in LA.
Okay.
So at UCLA, I really just went to school because this was what we were supposed to do. I was the first of 4. So my parents had no idea really how things functioned in this country other than you're going to get an education. So I went and I just studied psychology. I finished in 3 years, and so I took my last year and took whatever I want. At the time, I was thinking, well, I have to get a job, so I'll take classes in the business school, in the graduate school of business. And I got some kind of retail job when I finished, It was not a big deal. But when I finished, I was also very interested in health, and I got very involved with women's health. And I used to do consciousness raising groups with a professor who was teaching out in the San Fernando Valley. And I did that for a while and realized I wanted to get my master's in public health. So I went back to UCLA, and I got into a doctoral program there. And as I was studying, I realized I really didn't want to be an academic. I decided I'd just take my MPH and take a job doing some advocacy work, because in the course of my studies, I was doing some workers' rights work. This was like, what are working people being exposed to that could kill them? So we were in an era where cutting off a finger, hurting your back, that was not the thing. Now we're being exposed to teratogens, cancer-causing toxic substances, poisons basically, that would take away a life, irreversible terminal illness, because there's no protection of the worker. We used to say, does a person have to die to get a paycheck? Right? So I studied, occupational health.
Yep.
And we were successful in getting a law passed in California, to the Toxic Substances Control Act, that made it an obligation of an employer to monitor the workplace environment and either put in engineering controls or provide personal protection. During that time, I thought, I want to go to law school. I'm going to be a labor lawyer. This is how life happens, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I enrolled at King Hall. UC Davis has a law school named after Dr. Martin Luther King. Also not a mistake. Anyway, long story short is I became a criminal defense lawyer, not a labor lawyer. And I'm defending people that are both in the adult courts as well as juveniles. And I realized at some point my real job was not to say he didn't do it or she didn't do it. My job was to humanize my client. Everybody already hated my clients, especially in my homicide cases. These are evil people. They took another human life. My last case was a 17-year-old boy who killed his mother and his 10-year-old sister and reloaded in between. He should have never come out of prison.
Wow.
We won that trial.
Wow.
We did what we called a diminished capacity defense. The kid was abused physically and emotionally. He had no prior incidents of violence. Usually, when you have a young person take another person's life, they have signs. They're hurting small animals. They're destroying things. They're creating traps. There are other indicators. This kid had nothing. The worst thing that he had ever done was he had taken somebody's CD player without asking. And he had been physically abused. And there were marks on his body that got reported under the Tarasoff law in California to the authorities. And what did the authorities do? They sent the DCFS investigator to the family home, knocked on the door, and wanted to interview the mother in the home.
Right.
I mean, it was kind of crazy.
Right.
So we uncovered all this as part of the defense. And I still remember getting up in front of the jury and telling the jury that I'm going to say straight out that my client took the lives of his mother and sister. Jurors were like, what? We're going to trial. You're supposed to say he's not guilty.
Right.
But that wasn't the issue. The issue in the case was the prosecutor decided to file first-degree murder charges. That requires premeditation.
Mm-hmm.
There was no premeditation here.
Mm-hmm.
And, people snap. People snap. And it wasn't even a crime of passion. The father had guns in the house, and they were not secured. And the ammunition sat right next to the gun. And there had been threats, right? So he knew exactly where to get the weapon. And when the trigger event happened, which was his mother telling him that he was going to have severe punishment when his father got home, and he'd been beaten before, he snapped. It was enough already. And the sister was victim, I think, because she was always kind of the favored child, and she would kind of watch and be the little sister who thought it was funny that her brother was being disciplined. You see, this is all a story that is tragic. But at the end of the day, the jury went with our argument that this was not first-degree murder. That was my last trial. I just did not have any more in me to keep using my gifts in that kind of a space. So when you go through that sort of thing, you have to ask yourself after, many years doing that, whether you want to be doing that for the rest of your life, and I did not. And I tried to find out, what can I do? Can I because, you're leading a comfortable life. You don't want to let go of the paycheck or the benefits or the comfort, frankly, because you know what? At the end of the day, I leave the prison facility and I go to my very nice house and I can have a glass of wine and I can relax, right? I just knew that that wasn't really where I wanted to be. So my friends would say to me, well, if you're not a lawyer, what are you going to be, right? And a turning point happened. Again, this is the Tao, I feel. I can't explain what that is, but, things happen. So in 1992, a man named Rodney King was beaten almost to death in L.A. At the hands of police officers. And it had come on the heels of many other things that had happened in L.A., where racial tensions were starting to really get intense under very complex situations involving immigrants, involving class differences, involving the most visible Black and Korean community. So when Mr. King was caught on videotape being beaten, the city was in shock. The trial happened. The verdict was not guilty. It was enough already. The city blew up.
Oh, yeah, that was like a turning. I remember that moment.
Yes.
That was such a turning point for the
Yes.
country, even. So I can only
Yes.
imagine being in the city.
So as a Korean American, as a lawyer who did trials, as the incoming president of the Korean American Bar Association, I was asked to come out to ABC TV at the time. That was the news station that reached out. And they wanted me to speak on Ted Koppel's Nightline show, which is what I did. And that is what totally threw me into the vortex of what you would call the public, discourse around race.
Okay.
And I really could see, because of all my other work, that it was not blacks and Koreans who caused the 1992 civil unrest. $1 billion worth of damage, thousands of businesses destroyed, mostly all Korean. Right? So I was getting phone calls from everyone, from Barbara Streisand to Frank Zappa to Senator Inouye, then Congressman Norm Mineta. I mean, I was getting calls from the Blue House in Korea. My law practice, I had at one point 7 paralegals just helping me field all these calls. It was a little crazy. When I think back on it, I just think, was that my life? It was my life. When that happened, I just ended up spending probably 2 years in conversation. They had a thing called Rebuild LA. There were a lot of community groups that were trying to do work around race, around economic justice, around criminal court reform, around the carceral state and what needed to change about our attitude toward imprisoning people. There was a lot happening in the moment. Korea, they wanted me to come back there and meet the then president. I'm like, I'm not leaving LA. I'm not going to some other, capital when all this is happening. So for 2 years, that was my life. And then I tried to get back to practice. It's an interesting thing because I did not want to be the riot lady. You know what I mean? I just got tired of answering the questions about why did this happen. It was very clear why it happened. We were in an economic recession. We had really poor police-community relations. We had a situation where all the public dollars to invest in LA were being done in Bunker Hill, which is not where poor people lived. We had a growing situation where poverty was expanding and nobody was paying attention to it. We had a media that didn't understand the diversity of our community. All of these things, I just, laid it out. And by the way, it wasn't very much different from the 60s, except now you had more diversity and more complexity in the 90s. And I'm kind of seeing it right now. It's a little scary. So when I first kind of finished with what I thought were my responsibilities to speak as a Korean American from LA, born and raised, I tried to get back to my law practice. You always try to go back to home base. That's what I do. I studied law. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm in this practice. I'm a partner. I don't want to leave. But the more I did that, the more something else kept calling me to, that's not for you. And I happened to be involved with this National Asian Pacific Women Leadership Group. And this is where my spiritual journey began, because my contact there was one of the youngest people elected to state office, and she had a network. And I asked the president at the time if I could go to a place where the majority was not white. Hawaii, right? And I had 5 meetings set up, one of which was with the Zen master at a temple on the island of Oahu. He became my teacher ultimately. But in that space, I really learned the fact that all of life is suffering. And some people suffer more than others. That's the first noble truth.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about it? You're going to keep being a lawyer in LA? I told my teacher I want to come to Hawaii. I want to stay here. I was standing out on the Ingawa one day, watching the rainfall, looking at this image of the Buddha of compassion standing on a hill, and a rainbow came, and the rain was coming, and it was just, we had these strawberry guava trees, miniatures, that were just so beautiful. And I thought, I don't need any money. I don't need anything but a place to sleep that's clean, a place to eat, not too much, and a place to do some work that does something for more than me. But my teacher said, no, you don't belong here. This is always home, but you need to be where the people are. And not everyone can live in a place like LA. But since you were born there and raised there, you need to go back. Yeah, so I went back to LA, not happily, but I did. Ended a marriage because it was the wrong marriage. Literally went in and said, I think I'm in the wrong marriage. What? And this is a person, by the way, who I love
Yeah.
as a person, but wrong marriage.
Well, Angela, I find it.
No kids either.
Okay.
Karmically, no kids.
I find it fascinating that one of your interviews that you set up when you went there was with the Zen master. Had you had a Buddhist practice
No.
before? Had you had any spiritual practice before?
No. That's why I'm saying these things happen, right? I met with a news reporter who
Okay.
was part of a biracial family and was a writer and willing. I met a sovereignty movement person, a doctor, who had been very involved in the sovereignty movement in Hawaii for the Hawaiian people. I met a minister. I met a politician, and I met this Zen master. And the Zen master said, if you ever want to train, please feel free to come back. You'd be welcome. I didn't want to do it. And when I trained, he said, after a few times visiting, that if you're serious, you have to take vows. Because I can only train to a certain point, and priests will be given a deeper training, but I can't do that with you unless you take vows.
Were these refuge vows or just?
The vow is to spend your life trying to ease the suffering in the world.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So I went through that ritual, and it took me a long time. I really, I got caught up in the visuals because everything looked Japanese, and I'm Korean. And if you know anything of the history between Koreans and Japanese, not a great choice. But I thought to myself, well, I'm probably the most visible Korean American. No Korean monk has reached out to me, And there was something about the training there that was very resonant with me because it came from a warrior tradition, and that's the space that I was in at the time when I was younger. You fight to the death, and you do it with compassion. It sounds like that's not possible, but you don't have to bloody people up to take their life in this form. So we used to practice with swords. The training was very severe, and I needed that because I was very hard-headed at the time. I was an advocate. I knew right from wrong. I knew who was, going down the right path versus the wrong path. I wanted to tell everybody what to do because I knew. I was trained, right? It was very, very difficult to break that because everyone makes you think that you know something when you don't know a damn thing, really. If you've never lived and experienced hardship, you've never been in a situation where you had to watch somebody suffer, right? Or stand by and watch a system destroy a family. So anyway, I ended up deciding, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And that's when I realized, my former spouse used to say, well, it's great that you go do that, but you don't have to get so involved with it. You can just go do the thing. That's not, something that is your life. What do you get out of it? Because, of course, there's nothing material that you get out of it. You just know you're doing something that's meaningful with this life. You have one precious life. Why would you waste it on something like getting more money? You have to live in the world, too. So this is where the praxis piece comes into play.
That's right.
For what we're doing, right?
Yes.
So, yes, we want justice. Yes, We know that love has to be a part of the picture. And yes, spiritual transformation is essential. And I spent 5 years talking about race all around this country to all different kinds of audiences. Sometimes there were 500 people, sometimes there were five. But in doing that, I realized, because I got the same questions all the time, one of them being, well, do we just change people's behavior or do we change attitude? Like this was a question, right? And it's like, well, you could change behavior. The law does that for us.
Right.
But we still
Right.
have problems, don't we? On almost everything that the law touches. People suffer for 4 reasons:
What
fear,
are they? Yes.
doubt, suspicion, delusion. Fear, that's a big one right now. We're all living in it. Doubt, self doubt, doubt about what you're seeing, feeling. Suspicion, what's your game here? Delusion, reality by agreement, not reality. The law is delusion. We have all these laws that we're supposed to follow. Does it mean it's right? This is why no justice, no peace. Common sense. People who haven't studied the law, they know what's right. They don't see it coming out of the system.
Can you say a little bit, because one of the questions that I often get asked in this work sometimes is, even though for us it's natural to blend these two things together, or particularly racial justice and spiritual transformation, right, or love, but for a lot of people it's sort of a provocative blending.
It is.
Can you just say more about what's sacred about this space for you, and why braiding these three things together why does it matter?
The deepest, deepest suffering in this country, I think even in the world, it really is this inability to see our common humanity. It's just not there, it seems. Even when I went to Hawaii, there's a hierarchy there too. East
Right.
Asians occupy all the opportunities, it seems like, that are steady. If you're Tongan, if you're from Samoa, you're pitching tents for people to do their carnivals. You know what I mean? You're not working in an air-conditioned office at the state capitol for the most part. I think that's why the Zen training for me had to be severe. I couldn't go to a place where somebody said, just imagine the most beautiful beach no, I would not be able to do that. Or just allow yourself to feel whatever happens when you go quiet. I was so stubborn in how I thought I saw the world that I needed somebody to scold me when I was slouching, or when I didn't have the sensitivity to not move because it's going to disturb the person next to you. Or be able to say, you see an old person working really hard outside and the sun is beating down on them. Can you offer them a glass of water before they have to ask? Because they're focused on doing the work. Where's the sensitivity? So this is sacred, I think. This is sacred, to develop this capacity to know before anybody says anything. We say, can you see with your heart, right? Can you hear with your nose? Can you just be instead of constantly doing? It's hard in this Western context. I see the difference, right? How I was raised, what I saw in my family, and what I see here. So when you think about, the coming together in practical terms and addressing people who are not yet able to appreciate what racial justice is about, and it's not enough to look at the data about who's sitting in prison. It's not enough to look at the data about who is having to struggle with poverty, that it's not enough to think about who is on Skid Row in LA. It's kind of like a task of both and. Like, I think in order for us to go forward, we have to stop talking about both and really do it. Like, I can give you an example from being in the courts. I would be in court, I'd finish my case, I'd go out in the hall, an interpreter would have assisted my client, and at the end, they depart, and we bow. I actually had somebody come up to me afterwards and say, "Why do you bow? What are you doing?" It was another lawyer. And I said, "Oh, did I just bow?" I mean, you don't even think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, did I do that?" And then I realized, "Oh, yeah, okay, I did that." Well, I explained. It's a courtesy. It's a very, very minor courtesy, and we just kind of do that. And because America has become fortunate enough to have the diversity come, and I know there's fear about immigration, and I have a sibling who says, "Look, they're invading us. Millions of people are getting into this country. This is our country. This is," and what I can't get her to hear is that, yes, it's our country, and we are part of a world community now. We're not living back in the 50s, right? We're living in a time where everything is about the world. We have a big enemy that's being cultivated in the consciousness of America right now. It's China. People like me with this face, I'm not Chinese, but we have experience of what it means to racialize violence in America. So at one point, everybody was Japanese. People wore signs saying, "I'm Chinese," when they went out. In 92, people hung signs, "I'm black owned, I'm Chinese owned." Little Tokyo didn't get damaged the way that all the Korean stores in Koreatown got destroyed in 92. But everyone at that time was Korean, right? Today, anybody that looks like me is Chinese. We're the enemy. We're being cultivated to be the enemy. So what's happening in the community? People are getting ready. It's a scary time.
Right.
Racial justice. Yeah, we have our own thing that's deep here, right? The legacy of slavery. We're trying to address it. But this is why I say this is an area where complexity
Right.
is huge. It's huge.
And I'm hearing love, like all of the, even though you aren't using that language, this whole notion of a common humanity
Right.
and just like getting to the heart of people's suffering and
The both and again. We
is
can
like a
do
form of love.
common humanity.
Yeah.
We can do still paying attention to our communities that are very defined by our packaging.
Right.
Because some people need to do that. And
Right.
that's okay.
Right.
It's okay. But there are others that are ready to move beyond that, not making it meaning it's better, but move into even more complexity as we hold on to our communities from which we come, right? And it's possible because we are living in a time of global community and connectedness, and more people are realizing that. It's another both and. And by the way, humility, again, we just don't know it all. None of us do. We just don't know it all. We can work really hard to know ourselves. And then you realize, oh, I am the world. Right? I am the temple. I am the practice. I am the blessing. I am the prayer. I am.
What I actually would love to hear about is what spiritual practices, like what do your practices look like that help you be exist and be alive in this moment and do this hard work that you do
Okay,
too.
first, not hard work.
Okay.
Complicated.
Okay.
Complex.
I love
very
that.
very complex. Very complicated. Still making mistakes.
Okay.
Giving myself grace when I blow it. But it's not that hard.
Well, I call my work hard and holy, so that's why I
Hard
appreciate
and
that you
holy.
have a different name for it.
I can't, I think I've reached this place where everything, I get this synergy going. This is the
Yeah,
secret.
okay.
You have to have a way to come into synergy by being honest about what is my capacity. See, everybody can't do what I do. People used to ask me, how can I do what you do? And I'd have to say to them, I can tell you what I do, but you can't do what I do.
Right.
You have to do what you do, right?
Yeah.
So my practices are these. I sit every day. I sit for at least 20 minutes.
In that, for folks who don't know that, that's
Meaning
meditation.
meditation.
Yeah.
You can sit comfortably. I used to have a very specific form.
Yes, in Zen, I'm
but
sure you did.
yeah, but now I tell people sit comfortably.
Right.
If you want to close your eyes, you can. If you want to leave your eyes open, you can. Do what you want with your hands. Just be comfortable, right? So, there's the sit of 20 minutes. Sometimes I can't do 20 minutes. Okay, so I'll do 10 minutes. Sometimes I'm on an airplane. I'll sit on an airplane. Sometimes I'm driving, and not that I'm not paying attention, but I'm paying attention to my breath. Am I breathing like this? Right? Or am I just relaxing, paying attention to the rhythm of the road? Who's the person that's swerving in and out up there? Okay, stay back from that person. That's a form of meditation, right? It's an awareness, I guess you could call it. And then the other thing I do, very specific thing, is occasionally I will work with flowers. Okay, cut flowers. When you cut flowers, they're dead already, you see. But you see this arrangement? It's giving us a certain amount of pleasure, isn't it? Even in their dying process. In a few days, these will be wilted, gone. They'll have to be composted. But when you practice this cutting flower and you use the principles, unlike this is a bouquet, but I use the principle of heaven, the human being, and earth. And I use what's called a kenzan. It's like a frog. So you can set the stem, and you can make a beautiful arrangement with just 3 iris stems. And depending on how much attention you pay to the kind of vase, we don't typically use a vase that is tall. We will use a lower vase, right? So that the eye gets to see the whole stem. And you can feel the whole thing. This, in a Zen context, would be too much. You can't really, there's no clarity. There's no focus. There's no definition. It's colorful. It's beautiful, especially with this backdrop. So somebody has a very good eye for what this purpose is. But for a spiritual practice, to be constantly thinking of the heaven, human, earth. You see, this is our connection. This is our physical connection. We really believe that experience is what matters. So you can read about Zen. You can't really know anything about it without experiencing it. That's why, it's important when you have a teacher that there be a relationship. For us, it's every day is a fine day. Every day is a fine day. It's a lesson that came to us from the founder of the temple where we trained. And, we are blessed in every moment, and we really don't need anything more. Even the bad stuff, quote unquote, the bad stuff, it's welcome. So small suffering, big suffering, small eye, big eye, small mind, big mind. Right? It's always there. So around race, it's like I'm so gratified to have received the gift from Fetzer, because we were able to share and we were able to see how much, it sounds kind of crass, but sometimes people just need money. They don't need, the nice words or an award or a plaque or a recognition. They just need money because that's how this society works. This is the praxis part. And we have some fear about sharing money. Instead, we have to hire consultants and have focus groups and do all these assessments before we can build the damn housing, you know? I mean, I know those are jobs in and of themselves, but when you have a crisis on your hands, I don't think that the assessment piece, is vital, frankly. Somebody actually interviewed me once on an NPR program asking my opinion about these two bills that were going to make tens of millions of dollars available for affordable housing in LA and what I thought was going to be, the outcome of that. And I said, the outcome's going to be a lot of consultants are going to get hired. We aren't going to see any housing for a couple of years, at least, because the consultants have to be selected, then they have to be oriented toward what the contract needs, and then they have to do the outreach, and then they have to host the focus groups, and then they have, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm,
And in the meantime, people are living through seasons of heat, storms that are getting more and more intense, and suddenly the money's gone when you need to build the actual housing in accordance with whatever you've learned from all your focus groups and consultants. You see?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the critique now that's starting to come out in a place like LA. Yeah, you can put a few people into hotels for a while, but I do housing cases too, not just employment cases. I say my
In your
work is about
mediation now, yeah.
my work is about food and shelter. It really is. It comes down to that because people have been discriminated against for having a prison record or not having enough money and being what gets called, source of income discrimination. And what I see is that people just, the systems can't deal with the reality of people's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think mediation is such a great process, actually, because I get to do my meditation and spiritual work in connection with a process that society needs to replace a very burdensome litigation option, and we can get to a result in 6 hours. I just told a couple of lawyers last week, you know what? Everything we're learning today, it would take you 2 years to get this through formal discovery because of the back and forth of objections to the question and then having to respond and then threatening letters. If you don't respond, I'm going to seek sanctions, and then going to court. And by the way, it's going to take you 45 days to get into court.
Yeah.
We're going to get this done in 6 hours if you'll just let go of some of your needing to fight, because we don't need to fight here. We just need to stay focused on, this is what I know. I'm learning more about what you know. You're learning more about what I know. Here's the deal. I'm here in good faith, and I want to get this resolved. Now, if you don't have that, if you don't have good faith, might as well walk. And if I think that a party is present and is just trying to find out some information to help them in litigation, I end the mediation, and I'm upfront with them about it. We're not gonna waste your time or mine, right? Spiritual practice.
Well, that's what I was about to
It's a spiritual
ask
practice.
you. How can you say more about
Yes.
how you connect that?
When I read a situation, this is the blessing of having had a very peripatetic history. I've been the head of a nonprofit accused of something, right? I've been in private business. I understand your interest right away. A business person, I understand your interest right away and your concerns once I hear the facts. The complainant, I definitely understand your interests, okay? I never say I'm a neutral. A lot of mediators say, oh, I'm a neutral. Okay, in the day of Google, people look up your background. I am not neutral. You look up my background, you know where I've been. But I am fair, and I will pledge my best efforts to be fair in this process. But the spiritual part, here's another example. I had a case where a person had a mental breakdown. This person had a PhD, lived in a very fancy part of LA, and it was a housing discrimination case. The owner was an immigrant from Latin America. Tenants in the building had had it with this complainant. She'd had a couple of episodes. What the housing provider didn't realize was that she'd been in an accident and her meds were unavailable to her, and she had a couple of episodes, and one of which resulted in her being evicted, and she brought a claim for discrimination, mental disability. Mm-hmm. We went back and forth, back and forth. There was one point at which she came to my desk, and with both fists she was pounding on my desk saying, "I want money! I want money!" It was so loud that the guy outside my door had to like knock on the door and say, "Ms. O, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm okay." I just let her do her thing, right? She had a support person, a boyfriend, I think. And she was pacing, and I just let her do her pacing. And then I said, "Are you ready to sit down and talk?" And she looked at me like surprised. And she said, "You know what? Thank you for not telling me to calm down. Thank you for not ordering me and asking." And she sat down, she started crying. And she said, "I just haven't been able to tell him what my situation is." Do you know what happened in that case? This is what you call a miracle. I went into the other room and I tell the guy the whole story of what had just happened. He also heard her. He made her a loan for $4,000.
This is the landlord?
Yes. Yes, that does not happen.
No.
That's what you call a Perry Mason moment in mediation. That just doesn't happen, right? He actually asked if he could hug her.
Because he saw that she was suffering.
Yes, her humanity.
Right. Yeah.
He saw the suffering. So that's what I'm saying. My job, it does not drain me. It inspires me. Now, I have had cases where, a recent one I'm thinking about, where an employer withheld the money they agreed to pay for a very long time on a technicality. That happens too, but that's part of the mix. So.
And do you think your spiritual practices
Absolutely.
keep you grounded or allow you to be focused in a particular way? Okay.
When you have a spiritual practice that's steady, it gives you energy, it keeps you grounded in crises, it gives you clarity, and it gives you compassion. You have the ability to tap into equanimity. And then magic happens in all sorts of ways. Things start just coming. And you just have to know what to do when the things come. Every moment is a unique moment. It's never going to come again. So if you don't have your clarity, you're going to miss opportunities in life. You're going to unnecessarily hurt people. And you're going to be numb to what life is really all about. And many, many people realize what life is really all about at the very end. My teacher used to say, you can always tell a person who never resolved and had a lot of regret because they wear their pain on their face when they die. I had one friend tell me when she found her mother, she had died a couple days earlier. She found her mother and she said, my mother, who had a lot of suffering in her life, had the most beautiful, peaceful look on her face. She loved her children. She loved doing her work she was a farmer. And it was hard, but she lived a life that was worth living for her. So, I just, when you start opening your eyes, not just your heart, but really open everything about your existence, all kinds of things happen. All kinds of things happen. Does not mean you don't worry about the insurance bill that's sitting on your desk or the fact that you got rent due and maybe, it'll be close, but maybe you'll make it. No. None of that stuff goes away because you're a human being living in a material world. That's the thing. You cannot be, you can, but, the Buddha tried living the life of an ascetic and then had a realization, right?
Right.
And the hardcores like rejected him. But once they encountered the peacefulness and the compassion after he'd had his realization, it was like, there might be something there. There might be.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching or listening, and we invite you to share your own sacred stories and join the conversation. Visit us at fetzer.org to learn more.